I read recently of a Christian leader in India named Yesu. His father founded the mission, the Gospel Association of India, back in 1944 in a Hindu-dominated area. One day in 1967, a stranger came to their house and asked Yesu's father for prayer. Yesu's father was about to pray with him when the stranger pulled out a knife and stabbed him, and then tried to attack Yesu and his mother until others stepped in to help. As his father was being taken to hospital, he said to his son Yesu, "Where is the brother that stabbed me? I forgive him. Do not harm him." 3 days later, his father died. I've no doubt that it was hard for Yesu to forgive his father's murderer and to continue his father's work, but he did. And that mission now has over 400 churches and 250 pastors. The first followers of Jesus Christ faced similar opposition and persecution, but Jesus had some astonishing instructions for them. Let me read to you from Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 27 to 38. "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who ill-treat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over, will be poured into your lap. For the measure you use, it will be measured to you. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." We may not in our country face the same opposition and persecution that early Christians faced, or that Christians face in some countries at the moment. But most of us find that at some stage there are people who don't like us or who oppose us in some way. It may be because of things we have or haven't done that weren't the best, or sometimes we're victims of attack without any justification at all. But either way, Jesus calls his followers to react to opposition in a radically different way, different from the human natural way. Love your enemies. Love your enemies. Some people see what Jesus calls turning the other cheek as weakness. But actually it needs great strength not to retaliate to those who hurt us. It takes even greater strength to pray for our enemies. Loving your enemy is about being strong enough not to let bitterness and resentment take up residence in your heart and mind. It's about being strong enough not to let an enemy take away that inner love. the inner love that reflects the love and mercy God shows us. That strength comes from when we know the security of being a child of God. The ability to forgive those who hurt us comes from when we know God's astonishing forgiveness and mercy to us, and we want to reflect the mercy of our Heavenly Father. So Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you'll be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. And Jesus goes on, do not judge, and you will not be judged. It's easy, isn't it, to see faults and selfishness in others, and that's particularly true perhaps at this time when we're in lockdown and we're cooped up with others, or maybe we just look out on the world and see the failings of others around us. But it's often much harder to see our own faults and selfishness. I suspect that's why Jesus says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. This is not a call to switch off our thinking or discernment, nor is it a suggestion that we should ignore the evil and injustice around us. God cares passionately about justice. And it's certainly not a prohibition of Christians serving as court judges or magistrates. Rather, it's a call to throw out any attitude of judgmentalism, that attitude of seeing faults in others, or even seeking out faults in others, but being blind to our own faults and weaknesses. God longs to be forgiving, merciful, and generous to us, extremely generous. Jesus uses the metaphor, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over. The picture is of the days before the supermarkets. In the days before the supermarkets, people would take their own containers to buy grain or flour at a market, and the person selling would measure out a bushel or whatever measure was in use. And of course, a mean measure would use a small measure, a small bushel, and not fill it up to the top, or not measure it out properly. A fair shopkeeper would, of course, use an accurate measure and ensure that it was filled up to the top. But God's generosity is a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. A sort of overflowing measure. Is that the measure we're using for others? Or are we quick to judge, quick to do down others and condemn? And here's the rub of what Jesus says. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Christians are to use a good measure. If we see someone being selfish, rather than be judgmental, pray for that person. Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Let's pray. Father, help us to reflect your love, to love our enemies just as you loved us when we were enemies, to be merciful to others just as you were merciful to us. Amen.